Europe is home to 5,000 photonic companies. Many of these companies will at some point require funding. How to find and wisely choose investors? What are the pitfalls in raising capital? It is my sincere pleasure to welcome Andreas Umbach, who has had an incredible career in photonics. He has created a company, raised capital, sold a company. You've been through the entire process. Thank you so much for generously sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, thanks Carlos for the kind introduction and for inviting me here to give this, talk. I want to talk about entrepreneurship in photonics technologies, and in particular about the experience I made with, starting, raising and selling finally the company AUCCEPT Photonics. So my agenda is that I first of all introduce myself a little bit, what is the kind of wrap-up of the entire, my career, if you like. Then I'll go through some of the, pretty similar like Steve did, some of the main challenges or main, points of our startup at that time, and give you the story about it. And then I also collected a couple of guidelines, how to start a company, what is different, in particular, from my story. I was a researcher, as you will see, and going then into industry and starting a company it's a different thing, a different animal. So I'll try to help you a little bit there, and then I'll also show you in which areas I might be able to help you with my current role. So where am I? I studied physics. I'm not an entrepreneur by education, but also by experience. And I did that in Darmstadt and in Berlin, and then I joined early on the Fraunhofer Institute in Berlin to do, a very professional type of diploma thesis. And then I joined Heinrich Hertz Institute, which was a long path of my career. I stayed some 10 years there. I developed indium phosphide-based technology. Indium phosphide is a semiconductor material used for optical components in the laser space, in the fiber optic component space. And we were lucky as a group, me and my two colleagues, that in this institute that does research for other customers, we were able to stay on one topic for quite a long time. So we were able to, achieve a certain position in the academic world, and we're kind of able to develop a leadership technical-wise. And that finally led to the, spinning out U2T Photonics. First of all, we called it much differently because, we were told, well, the company name has to kind of explain what you're saying. So we put innovative in there, we put optoelectronic components in there. And, with the AUCCEPT, we followed kind of the HP, the Hewlett-Packard approach. We just used the initials of our last names. And then we started the company in 1998 as a spin-off of Heinrich Hertz Institute. And I acted as a CEO of that company. We acquired another spin-off of the same institute very early on to complete our product offering, and formed then a different legal organization, U2T Photonics AG, and corporate and shares. And then we acquired a group in the UK, so we had a subsidiary in the UK doing gallium arsenide modulators, which was kind of the also complementary product to ours, and did another acquisition in Berlin. And in 2014, finally, we sold the company to Finisar, and I served 2 years as a vice president general manager of that operation, and then another 2 years as a CTO of that operation. But in September 2018, basically I quit Finisar because, as part of a big company, of a very big company, this is difficult, to be an entrepreneur. It just doesn't fit. You don't have the impact, and they want to also have control of their own entrepreneurship as a big corporate, tanker. So it was a good decision. So now I'm acting as a consultant within my consulting company, AUCCEPT. So let's go into the U2T story a little bit more in detail. What was our motivation to create the company? Well, it was really triggered by an interest in the market. The market at that time, was an R&D market. So we displayed our research results or components in trade shows just like that as, the results of European projects. And we had other colleagues come in and, hey, I could use this in my own lab, in my own experiments. Can we buy some of these photodiodes? And so we thought, well, that's a good idea maybe, but how do we achieve that? Let the institute sell the parts and offer it, which would lead to a situation where, some department director of the institute, who is not really, a commercial person either, will offer our product to conditions that we cannot control and will maybe offer specifications that we would not want to really, sign up to. So we wanted to control that process. What do we offer? What do we get for it? And how do we address the market? And that's why we just said, well, then let's start the company. And our motto was, we just do it, the three of us, and learning by doing. It can't be so complicated, being a physicist to run a company. Then we were kind of pushed into, participating in a business plan contest. And, well, there were questions suddenly asked, we didn't really discuss very much beforehand. And so we did, answer these questions to ourselves. And it was a very valuable experience, trying to actually define the business model after we already created the company and define and answer all the questions of a business plan to be able to really define our own goals, because we didn't want to raise money in the first place. The other part there was that there was a program in Berlin at that time where we could participate in workshops, how to learn, I would today say, how to learn the language of the financial people, of the lawyers, of the market, because so far we were used to calculate in gigahertz or in nanoseconds or whatever you would like. But now we had to use much more simple formulas, but applied to euros and numbers and volumes of products. And we had then luck. We were very lucky, that the institute supported us very much. It was politically desired to spin out companies, and it still is. So I'm just encouraging that, because at the end it's a win-win situation for both, for the spin-off and for the institute. In our case it was very imminent in the first year. We applied for research funding from public organizations, and part of that went into the institute, part of that went into our business. And it was required to have that partnership to get access to these funds, and this is still the case. So it's a win-win situation. Also, we were able not to, trying to raise a lot of money to start a company from scratch, but we were able to use the infrastructure of the institute, starting with a photocopy machine. So we had our own copy account, 10 pfennigs at that time per piece of paper. But we didn't have to buy a photocopier. Well, this is a simple example, but there is, in such an institute, they have test instruments worth $1 million or 300, 400,000, and we just paid for the use of it, and we could use it, and we paid for that, but we didn't have to buy it up front. And even more so, the indium phosphide technology is a semiconductor technology, so you need a fully equipped clean room with worth maybe at that time 30, 50 million euros or so. Maybe today it would be maybe more. We also used that infrastructure to build our product at the end, and we kept doing so until actually we sold the company to a big corporation. So that was a very, very good and valuable model for us. What do you need? You need some differentiation in the market. You need something that nobody else has, or maybe almost nobody else has. So what was our differentiation? It was, a new type of photodiode at that time. I don't want to dig into that in too much detail, but photodiodes had to become faster because the data rates of the optical communications were getting faster and faster. And there was a natural limit for a standard photodiode structure. If you imagine a photodiode as being an absorptive layer, and then you inject some light, and then the light generates electrical carriers, and the carriers have to move to the electrodes. And this takes some time. So if they have to be fast, you have to make the absorption layer thinner and thinner. But then at some point in time, because absorption is an exponential process, you lose a lot of the light. So in this was solved in a sense by our invention, I would say, of the waveguide integrated photodiode, where you use a waveguide and then put the photodiode layer on top. It can be very thin, but it's long, so it can absorb all the light, and still the carriers can travel to the electrodes very quickly. So this was kind of the first very fast and efficient photodiode which we did, and it was our unique selling proposition for a market demand that was there. And then, from that basis, we developed different types of photodetectors. We were the first, introducing 40 gig photodetectors into the market. Then we were the first, also develop a true 100 gig coherent receivers in 2010. So we kept innovating because, that was our strength. We were a kind of a development-focused company, and that's what we had to do to stay in the market. And how did we do that? Well, we engaged very intensely with our customers, with the users of our products. They told us what they really need, what is the important specifications, how many do they need, when do they need them. We learned a lot from them, and we also learned about the next generation. And that is, I think, one of the very important messages, engage with your customers. If you have something to offer, they will exactly tell you how to tweak it so that it's really fit for their purpose. How did we finance the company? Financing is an important role, of course. And in our case, very early on, we had contacts with venture capital firms. Our strategy at that time was, because we had that soft start condition out of the institute, we didn't want to raise, a lot of money first and give away all the equity, because why do that if we don't really need the money right now? So we tried to do a stepwise approach, and for that we found a very wealthy and big business angel who was able to fund our business. But before that we had joint R&D projects. We had a lot of support from the Senate of Berlin, from the German government, from the research institutes, from EU projects. And then once we built a certain business, we even were able to use bank loans, for example, for the acquisition of the UK company that was financed through banks. But you can only do that when you have a profitable running business. Before that, in the early stages, you don't need to even talk to banks, because they are just too risk averse, and they have to be, because they deal with other people's money. And if you talk to people who deal with their own money, they can make a decision. If you just administer other people's money, you cannot just make a risk decision. And this is, I think, the differentiation between business angel money, private investors, and VCs, because they also deal not with their own money, and banks. And they don't. In our case, to be pretty straightforward, we didn't want to sell the business. We wanted to grow it and keep growing and keep growing. Germany is a land of family businesses, big family businesses. So we wanted to grow a business and keep it. And with the private investor, this was a joint strategy that we could have. We didn't need an exit plan in the beginning. For a VC, they need an exit plan because they have to pay back the money to their investors at some point, and then you need some return of the money. And the last point, I think, is really important, and I think this applies to any kind of investor. You need a very good, intimate, personal relationship to the people you work with. If that doesn't work, if the chemistry is not right, it will be trouble. And in our case, it worked out well because you have to work with them, in good times, but also in bad times. And they, have to give you, I think, the best of that they have, which is not their money, but their trust, their confidence. So, in our, story, we did need, some time and some confidence of our investors because, after we founded the company, well, there was some initial growth from the test and measurement market, which was quite nice, and we had a company of some 15, 20 people at that time. But then this telecom crisis came about, and there was no innovation at all. So we were, offering a product for the next generation telecom systems. But there was no next generation because it was all over-invested and nobody wanted to install a next generation. 40 gig was stalled for 5 to 6 years. So we survived that. We in that time we had other businesses. We bought this other company which was doing more lasers for the R&D market. And we had, an increased share of, the light green R&D contracts from public funding also. But we survived through that time, and then at the end of that, we were the only providers of that technology. So we had the stamina to, be able to supply the products that were needed at the time when the market was ready for them. And then we were the only supplier into the 40 gig network build out of AT&T and other companies. And this we had to grow the company by a factor of 2 in terms of revenue, a couple of times. And of course, we needed to innovate. Steve made a good point. You need to still look at the next generation, even though you are very busy with growing the current product. And this was 100G in our case, and so we grew the company, or we developed the next stage in 100 gig products, and were quite successful with that. But the 100 gig market was a different story because it was a very clear perspective for everybody in the industry. So all the big players, all the Japanese corporates, all the American big players, everybody wanted to have products at 100 gig, and we had the first one, so that was good. But in order to participate in that market, big corporations, they have the opportunity to use, just co-fund this product from their other businesses. So they are selling under cost or doing bundling offers so that, the price drops in 100 gig were very extreme. And as a small company, relying just on this product, more or less, we couldn't really keep up with that. And we didn't have the infrastructure to just grow it as quickly and scale down our costs as quickly as maybe others could. So we decided to sell the company, and we sold it to Finisar, as Carlos already mentioned. Finisar was a very good match for us because they had exactly the skills to scale this kind of product and sell it into these big markets better than we had. And on the other hand, they had exactly this technology gap. So if you look for a strategic investor or an exit, you need to, of course, fill a need that they have, and only then they will be interested. If you have something very interesting and some great perspective, but it's not in their scope, so what? If it's really filling a gap that they need for the next generation of their products because their market moves on, this is the right partner for an exit. In our case, it was the coherent technology, the coherent components that we had to offer. So just to summarize some of the key success factors, we built this company upon our own strengths. We concentrated on what we were good at. We did not move to another business. We waited until what we were good at really found the right market. So stamina was required. But I think I want to also stress, you are not alone. You are working with a lot of partners. And I say partners because it's in the industry is working together to create win-win situations for all of us. So you know, the customers, they want your product. They will also help you if you have a problem with it, because it solves their problem as well. You know, technology providers, like an institute, has to be leading edge, and you know, then they can really help you. But also suppliers, you know, not all of the suppliers out there, they want to deal with your initial demand of a very special little RF package that you may need in the future in large volume, because they have other businesses to follow. So they also you have to build a trust relationship with them. And of course, the investors, I mentioned that, you know, they have to share your vision and your ideals in good times and in bad times, in particular in bad times. And team is, of course, very important. You know, you cannot say that, you know, often enough. You need to build the right team. And then one of the other, you know, messages, I think, is listen to economic reason. I mean, this is, I hope these times are over, you know, but before, in the dot-com bubble, you know, companies were kind of rated by the speed they can spend the money. Well, this is not, you know, what you wanted to do. We lived through, you know, quite a more or less like a bootstrap model, and always focused on, you know, making some money, at least making, you know, not losing so much money. And stamina already mentioned. And what you also need is quite some luck. You will need it. You know, there will ever be obstacles there. So what changes? You know, now if you are in a research, or if you are a researcher in a university or in an institute, is the type of motivation in the job will change. You know, you will have to generate profit from competitive products. You know, as opposed to being a researcher, you just want to deepen your knowledge and be an academic star, maybe in a very specific field. You made a good point on this very early on in your presentation. The goal is, you know, the performance in the desired application, meeting the cost target, meeting all specifications at the same time, not just, you know, publishing one record result. It has to be reliable, you know, and manufacturing issues are really, you know, not where you expect them. They will always be someplace else. So, you know, that's, you know, not something to explore. It's not explorative, but it's maybe a very down-to-earth problem, a mechanical problem maybe. You know, because customers, you know, use your package and screw it down too hardly and it bends. And it wasn't supposed to bend, but suddenly your optical alignment is gone. Of course, you would never bend it like that, but some customers might. So this is, you know, very multidisciplinary understanding of a product is required. Instead of, you know, you need to have the holistic view of it and not really be a specialist who can look the deepest into one special fact. And feedback will be, you know, from the customers. I think the best point in time when you start a business is when you really get the first money paid for product, your first revenue in the bank. This is really very rewarding. You know, it's a very good moment to have. And, you know, not so much, but you still, of course, in the academic community, it's also a nice job because you get a lot of personal recognition there too. So just, you know, optical components is a very multidisciplinary science. You know, RF design, test and measurement methods, optical design, semiconductor physics, mechanics, all this has to be, what was combined into just one product. And just underlining what we had. So defining a business model, you have a couple of questions you have to ask yourselves. You know, what's your USP? What's your differentiation? What type is it? You know, is it a high volume market? Is it a small market? Is it very specialized? So there's a lot of questions. You know, in particular, who are your customers? You know, what do they need? And then you can find some kind of business model to address this need in a best suited manner. And of course, you know, these questions then will lead to some kind of a business plan. And I just picked one from which I found on the internet here, an agenda is, you know, for the content for a good business plan. And then you need to write it, and the questions will come as you go through these chapters. You know, I think today it's maybe a little bit out of the fashion to really write that down, you know, in multi-pages, but you have slides and pitches. The questions are still the same, and we need to answer them. So, you know, how can I help? I think, you know, I hoped I told you that entrepreneurship requires a multitude of skills. You know, it's about business, about risk, about technology, know-how, about project management, how to grow an organization, how to manage people. This is one of, I think, the most important skills you need once you really go with it. And so there's a lot of challenges, and you know, by consulting, I think, you know, being a consultant, being some sparrings partner for you to discuss the problems at hand, this can help, you know, make your startup more successful. And that's because there will be crisis, you know. I mean, in any organization, when it grows, you know, it becomes older, but it becomes bigger, and you will have all the type of different crises that you will have to live through, and the solutions are always different. And you know, having lived through all that, and you know, just like Steve, multiple times, I've only lived through that once. But I think I can help and give you some advice, or at least be, you know, a good partner for discussion of these topics. So this is my consulting company, AUCCEPT, and you know, I'm happy to help you if you start a company and want to, you know, some coaching and consulting. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed the learnings and experience shared in this video. This video is part of the European-funded project Impulse and has received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme. Impulse is the indium phosphide manufacturing pilot line for upscaled, low-barrier, self-sustained photonic integrated circuits ecosystem.